All right, everyone, it is 6:30, so we're gonna get started. I'm hoping that we'll have a few more people kind of filter in. So as we see them come in, I'll probably give them a brief introduction as well. But my name's Laura Maihofer. I'm a certified professional dog trainer and behavior consultant with Canine Turbo Training. And this is our Ask the Trainer, Is This Trainable webinar. So this webinar is set up as a forum for you to ask any questions you have in. There's two different ways to ask questions. Oh, hi, Christine. Thank you. We have a chat box where you can ask questions by typing in, or you could raise your hand. So there should be a raise hand function, and I can unmute you and allow you to talk. So you could ask your question out loud. We have previously had some issues with the unmuting of certain people. So if you raise your hand and I say, oh, I'm having trouble unmuting you, then you can go ahead and ask your question in the chat box. This is going to be in the Zoom webinar chat box, not in a box that says question and answer. So quick little distinction. So in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about different dogs and different behaviors that we can train. And as I said, I'm really here to answer any of your questions. So feel free to shoot questions over in the chat or raise your hand at any time. I'm going to have some time at the end of each slide, as well as time at the end for any additional questions. What you'll notice as the theme of this is most behaviors are trainable. Any behavior we see, we can pretty much train. But there are situations where management might be a better option. So setting the dog's environment up so that they're more successful just in the environment as opposed to teaching them a skill. So we'll kind of talk through a few different scenarios where management might be preferable to training, and some scenarios where you think training might not work, but we find that it does work really well. And then again, you're welcome to ask your questions at any time. So if you have a specific behavior or a dog that you're working with and you're wondering, is this even possible? I'm happy to help you kind of tease through why we might be struggling or what we might need to do in order to set that dog up for success. All right, so starting out, I want to talk a little bit about characteristics of your dog that might make training easier or harder, or you might not be sure whether or not you can train because of these characteristics. So the first one we get a lot of questions about is age. Is my dog too young to train? Now we hear this very often, and what we find is that a puppy as young as 8 weeks old can learn bunches of different behaviors. Puppies actually start learning the moment their senses come through. So once they're able to physically move around, smell things, hear things, see things, they're starting to learn from their environment. So as young as 3 to 4 weeks, your puppies are actually starting to learn different things. Now, when it comes to our behaviors, sit, down, stay, some of those basics, coming when called, you can start these behaviors as soon as a young puppy comes into your home. When I was doing a little bit of research, I saw videos of puppies 5 weeks old learning how to sit. They're very, very cute. Typically, in order to join classes, your puppy should be 8 weeks old, because at 8 weeks, they will have had their first round of shots. It used to be thought that puppies should not join classes until they've had the full series of shots and booster shots, which made it so that puppies weren't joining until about 4 to 6 months. But in the actual first few weeks of their lives, between age 7 weeks and 14 weeks, our puppies go through a period called the sensitive period for socialization. And this is a period of time where we call their brains really sticky. And by sticky, we mean they're absorbing tons of information about the environment, and their brains are actually developing for the environment they're in. So if our young puppies just stay in the home during that time and they don't go out and see people or dogs, they can be very surprised or even scared when they're a little bit older and they go out and see dogs and people out in the world. So it is advised now to start bringing your puppies out and socializing them in controlled and safe settings where other dogs have had their vaccinations and other people are working with those dogs as young as 8 weeks, once they are up to date with their vaccines. If you have more questions about whether your puppy is in a good health state to start training, that's a really good question for your veterinarian. But as far as trainers are involved, your puppy is welcome to start training as young as 8 weeks, as long as they're up to date on shots. Now, another age-related question we get is, what about my older dog? I have a dog who's 10 or even 6, 7, or 8, and I assume that they aren't going to be able to learn anything new. Now, that is one of the oldest myths in training, that an old dog cannot learn new tricks. But as we find out time and time again, old dogs absolutely can learn new tricks. In fact, my dog, I got her when she was about 8, and she has learned so much since joining my home. One of the tricky things about teaching an older dog is your older dog has had, as however many years old they are, that many years of experiences in life. And they have already been learning, whether we wanted them to or not. So if you have an older dog who's practiced for the last 5 years, jumping up on the counter and stealing food, it is going to be more difficult to train them not to jump up on the counter and steal food than a young dog who's just experiencing countertops for the very first time. And this has to do with our dog's reinforcement history. So the number of times they've done a behavior and earned reinforcement for it. Reinforcement is anything that your dog finds pleasurable and increases the frequency of the behavior they did. So for example, if we are teaching a dog to sit, we might use a treat as reinforcement. Every time they sit, they get a treat. If they start sitting more frequently, that treat is a reinforcer. Now, same situation, maybe every time our dog sits, we're giving them a piece of dog food, but they don't seem to be sitting more frequently. That dog food might not be reinforcing to our dog, even if it's labeled as a treat on the bag. So as we're working with an older individual, we want to think about their reinforcement history. What has happened in their life previously? What did they find reinforcing? So again, if you have an adult dog, maybe a 5-year-old dog, who's been tearing up the toilet paper rolls their whole life, and now we want to train them not to tear up toilet paper rolls, it's going to take a little bit of extra management, so setting up the environment so they don't practice, in order for that dog to really be successful, because they have a long history of reinforcement for tearing up toilet paper rolls. If you have any questions at all about age as it's related to training, please feel free to enter them into the chat box, or you can go ahead and hit that raise hand button, and I can set it up so that you can actually talk out loud with questions. Now, the other characteristic about our dogs I wanted to talk about with relation to training is breed, because we do hear a lot of people say, well, my dog is a Dalmatian. Can you train Dalmatians? Or my dog is a Rottweiler. Can you train Rottweilers? Or my dog is an Akita. Can you train Akitas? Any dog, any breed can be trained. But certain breeds will predispose our dogs to certain behaviors. So for example, if you have a dog who is bred to herd, such as, let's see, our Australian cattle dogs or healers. Those dogs were bred to herd livestock. So they were bred to run around behind cows and bite at their ankles. They are likely to be predisposed to that behavior. So as we're training that particular breed, we're going to keep in mind these behaviors that are heritable, that they might have received through their genetic lineage. And so with each different breed, there are some behaviors that are going to be a little bit stickier. And so we will work with them on outlets for their natural behaviors. Now, there are also some breeds that have been shown in the research to have a greater tendency towards different behavior problems, specifically compulsive behaviors, such as spinning or chasing lights or shadows. Some breeds, including our bull terriers, tend to show more likelihood of showing compulsive behaviors. Same thing with our Doberman pinschers. Our Doberman pinschers are more likely to show a compulsive genetic behavior known as flank sucking, where they actually mouth at their rear end. Now, just because it's a Doberman pinscher does not mean it's going to show that behavior. But when we do see that behavior in a Doberman pinscher, it can be a genetic basis for it. Now, when we see those kinds of behavior problems that are associated with their breed or their genes, there is a lot we can do with management and training to help reduce the intensity of those compulsive behaviors. And especially with our dogs who are herders or who have been bred to really work, there's a lot we can do with training in order to give them really good, fun jobs that are outlets for those natural behaviors. There is no breed that is not trainable. And there is no breed that is not trainable using force-free positive reinforcement techniques. So even our intense working breeds, we see Malinois a lot, who are strong workers. Those dogs can really thrive when they're taught which behaviors work out for reinforcement. Again, with the idea that we need to give them an outlet for their extra energy. Okay, so I have a question. Can you define sticky one more time? Yes. So we call our young puppies who are going through their sensitive socialization period, we say they have sticky brains. So sticky in this sense really just means that they are absorbing all the information that they come across. So we call their brains sticky because they're learning. They're learning really fast. And whatever they experience, they are going to expect that the world works that way. So if they start to learn, I get attention and rewards when I sit, as they grow older, their brain is set up to feel like sitting is likely to get them attention and rewards. If they see dogs and people who are calm and happy and the world experienced as calm and happy, they're going to be more likely to think that's the kind of world that we live in. Whereas if they have negative experiences, or if they're isolated during this young time, we sometimes run into dogs who have to be isolated due to medical issues, such as puppies who have parvo. Those puppies are going to be less likely to get out to see lots of dogs and people during that time. And so their little sticky brains are not learning that there are other dogs and people. They're starting with a really small world. So when we get puppies who, during this very young period of time, are kept home for medical reasons, or with the old idea that we need to wait for them to get fully up to date or fully through their booster shots, it can take some careful socialization to reintroduce them to the world and have them not be nervous. So I hope that helps clear up what I mean by sticky. Okay, so we have another question. A Labrador who's 4 years old, somewhat trained, can walk nice on leash, no sit and lay down, listens pretty well. Problem with him trying to learn new tricks or commands. Unlike another dog, that can slow himself down and try and understand. The lab tends to get hyped up and can't seem to focus. Is there a way to train him to calm down and focus? Or is it more trying to redirect the energy? Oh, this is such a good question, Shelby. So for our excitable lab, a young dog, 4 years old, I'm going to think about 3 different things when I'm looking at this situation. So I do want to make sure he's getting lots of physical and mental exercise. And I would probably do a little bit of physical and mental exercise before trying to train anything that requires a lot of focus. So I might do some fun play and running for maybe 15 or 20 minutes beforehand, and then have a period of time where we sort of calm down afterwards. So we could go for a run or go play fetch, and then come back in and sort of have some petting, have some engagement, maybe give a food puzzle to help him come down in arousal off that high excitement. And then when I train, what I want to do is set it up so he's very likely to be successful. So with dogs who have shorter attention spans, I do want to set it up so that we end training while they still want to train. So instead of following a basic formula where maybe I do 5 or 10 repetitions of one behavior in a row, I'm going to shrink that down to fit what this dog can do. So for some dogs, it's only 3 or 4 repetitions before their brains need to go off and do something else. Now, it sounds like he's also a really busy puppy who can get, well, adult dog, but a 4-year-old lab can still act like a puppy. He might be distractible by different things going on in the environment. So I think about trying to manage it so he's in a space that's relatively calm and quiet. So for example, if having the other dog around is distracting him, I'd go train in a room away from the other dog and away from other people. So the main things to focus on in the room are me, the treats or toys that I have as reinforcers, and finding something that he does really, really enjoy as a reinforcer. So I mentioned here our breed tendencies. Something about the Labrador is they have been bred to retrieve. So if he is a working line Labrador, he probably really likes to play fetch or to grab a toy and bring it back. We can actually use that in training. So if you're working on a calm stay, you could have him sit and stay. And then we could say yes and feed a treat, and then release him to go get a ball. So we can use the really fun things that they like as our reinforcers in training. And for our dogs who are more inclined towards the ball than the food, that can be a more powerful reinforcer to some of them. Now, the other thing you might consider is capturing calm behavior. So if we have a high energy dog and we really want them to start showing us more calm behaviors, when we see them lie down on their own, you could go over and give him a treat or go over and give him attention if he likes getting pet, so that he starts to learn these calm behaviors I offer really pay off. Now, that sort of training is a long-term training, not a short-term training. So the first time you go over and give him a treat when he was laying down calmly, he's likely to get up and follow you and be like, oh, where'd that treat come from? Can I have more? So what we want to do in that scenario is we can talk to the dog and engage with him, but I'm not going to feed him more treats for getting up and following me. Instead, I'm going to wait for them to offer calm behavior again. So if he lays down naturally on his own, I'll give him another treat. So the way to earn that food is through calm behavior. I hope that helps answer the question. If you have any more questions on him or on that subject, feel free to keep posting questions. All right, we have another one. A dog that's almost 8, a little over a year ago, suddenly had to put down our other dog due to acute illness, 13. I'm so sorry, that's very hard. 7-year-old dog will walk on leash to get from the car to the dog park or into the vet, but won't let me walk him on a leash for just a walk. Lays down, won't get up. Tried walking out a different door and driving him to the park for a walk, and he does the same thing. 30-pound lab terrier mix. Okay, Amanda, yeah, so we have an older dog, 7 or 8, adult dog, who recently lost his friend. So in the last year we had his buddy was put down, and now he's not interested in going on walks. So for your 8-year-old dog who's still around, it's possible that he really associated the other dog with walks. If we took them out together and that was a common routine, that now when we go out on walks, there's really a sense of loss. Our dogs do mourn just like humans do. So when we lose a dog and they're in the household, they lose a dog too. So in this case, because it's a behavior change in an adult dog, the first thing I want to do is make sure that he's not having any physical issues. So for your 8-year-old whose behavior has changed, I would take him to the vet just to rule out anything physical. Oh, and you've always walked them separately. So it's not I'm missing my buddy when we're walking. Yes, since he's an adult dog and we're seeing a behavior change, even though it's correlated with the loss of the other dog, I'd want to make sure that he's cleared by the veterinarian and that we don't have a physical issue that might be causing him to not want to walk as much. It sounds like he, when you take him to the park, he goes to the dog park and then he'll walk to the car. He'll go into the vet and then he'll walk to the car, but he's not going further than that. If we've ruled out any sort of physical issue, the next thing I might do is start to set up a series of rewards on a walk. So what I like to do is create feeding or training stations on a daily walk. And if the dog chooses to go back, I will always let them go back. So what this looked like, I actually had to do this with my dog when I first brought her home because she is fearful of different environments and she was fearful of going on walks. So we set up some really easy to access feeding stations. It was just a pile of dog food right outside the door, about 15 feet away from the door, that we could go out and eat and then we go right back in the house. And over time, I changed where those feeding locations were located. So you could set up a stimulus where the dog could really see clearly, this is the location of food. So either like a mat or even you could have like a cone there next to the food. And I slowly start to move that. So it's a bit of a longer jog to go get the food and then come back in. And I give the dog choice. Do you want to keep going forward or do you want to go back to the house? If the dog keeps going forward, I'll reward them for going forward. But I'm just setting it up so that there's something really great to look forward to when you go out the door and head out on a walk. But again, I'm only going to do that if I've got the go-ahead from the vet that the dog is physically sound. Now, with my dog, she did have some pain in her back legs. So that was part of the reason she didn't feel comfortable going out in these different environments. And once we started treating her pain, she started to be a lot more comfortable going out and exploring, although she still likes to have the car kind of in view. I hope that helps with your 8-year-old. Again, I'm thinking about really making sure that everything is physically okay. And then I think about setting it up so there's something to really look forward to on walks. Sometimes we'll go ahead and do something like driving partway down the block, parking the car, and then walking home, so that you can build up this, we're always walking to home. We're gonna go ahead and walk to home. But it can depend on the individual dog, whether or not they would like to go home or if they'd like to go to the car. My dog's favorite place in the world is the car. So that strategy wouldn't work for us because we could park down the block, she'd go 10 feet and then she'd go right back to the car. But really importantly, if the dog says we're not gonna walk right now, I always listen to them because there is a reason for his behavior, whether it's physical or fear, or maybe he had a negative experience at some time and we didn't even know it happened. Perhaps a dog barked at him once from behind a fence, which happened to my girl, which caused him to think, ooh, this is not safe. If they don't feel safe, the walk isn't really an enjoyable experience. In the meantime, if he's still really interested in running around in places like the dog park, you could consider looking into some of our exercises for the dog outside of daily walks. There's a lot of different ways we can give our dogs exercise with or without a fenced backyard that doesn't include the neighborhood walk. And I can send those out after this as well. I'm gonna make a note. I hope that helps, Amanda. First ruling out the physical and then moving on to making the walk a reinforcing activity where we go down the street a little ways and there's something really good for him. But I want those feeding stations to really start within his comfort zone. So if he's happy to walk 10 or 15 feet out the door, we could start there. If it's we show him the leash and he's running into the back room, I would start right there. I pick up the leash and then I feed you a meal, so that that starts to become a really positive thing. All right. What other questions do people have about age or breed or any other characteristics about their dog and whether or not behaviors are still trainable for them. All right, we're gonna go to the next one. So I want to talk a little bit about disabled dogs because we do get a lot of questions. My dog is blind, can you still train them? Or my dog is deaf, can they still learn? And then we even have some dogs who are in wheelchairs or have other physical disabilities. And all of those dogs are absolutely trainable. So a blind dog can learn just as well as a sighted dog. A deaf dog can learn just as well as a dog who has hearing. And a dog in a wheelchair, there's tons of different things that they can learn. Here you can see Bowser. He's in a full cart. He has difficulties with his back legs and his gait. And so he went to our canine self-control class and was working on his comfort around dogs, how to focus on his owner, and all sorts of different fun skills. I had a dog in a wheelchair in one of my classes who had a back leg wheelchair, and we just set up some mats on the ground so he had traction, and that boy was so excitable. He could turn. He was learning loose leash walking on his wheelchair. So our dogs who have disabilities still absolutely can learn these skills. You can also see on the right here is a photo of Mako's graduation. Mako is wearing a little bandana that says, "I'm not ignoring you, I'm deaf." So he's deaf, and I don't think you can see it in this photo. You might be able to. He actually has a vibration collar on most of the time. Not sure he's wearing it right there. But this is a collar that looks very similar to shock collars, which we do not recommend for training. But the vibration collar was something that he was very, very carefully conditioned to. So his owner, Charlie, is a very, very skilled trainer, and she was teaching him that that little vibration meant he was going to get food. And that was used as his marker. A marker simply means a sound or a sensation or something that tells the dog you earned food. With my dog, she's deaf, we use a thumbs up marker. So I'll ask her to sit using a hand signal. She sits, I give her a thumbs up, and she gets food. That thumbs up serves to tell her that behavior earned you the treat. Now with Mako, he had been trained that a vibration, a very soft vibration, means you're gonna get a treat. So there are lots of different ways we can work with our dogs who are disabled. Our blind dogs, we can teach them using scent cues. So you can teach a blind dog to recall to a scent cue or a verbal cue. You can teach dogs how to experience their environment. So where maybe a piece of moved furniture is, using little scent markers. But most of our dogs will actually learn how to get around just fine on their own without seeing or hearing. And as an example, I have this cute little video. I hope you can all see it. I hope it works too. Of Millie-san, which is our trainer Kyle's dog. She is blind and deaf. And here she is going downstairs for the first time in her life. And you see, this actually looks just like any other puppy learning how to go down the stairs. She's sniffing her way down. She's got her head a little lowered as she's going. We'll play it one more time because it's super cute. A little whine because she's uncertain, but here she kind of feels it out with her paws, and she's learning how to go down the stairs. And I just love this. She doesn't need to be able to see. She doesn't need to be able to hear. She can maneuver through the world just fine. How would you go about training recall for a deaf dog? That is a very good question. Let me get the presentation back up. There we go. So recall for a deaf dog can be done in several different ways. The first thing that I like to teach is the dog to actually come to a scent cone or to a tactile cue. So you could also use a visual cue. So there's all sorts of different things. Deaf dog, they can learn through our body language. A blind dog can learn through the verbal. A blind and deaf dog, I use scent typically. So we can have a smell that means recall, or a sensation that means recall. My dog is deaf. She has a few different recall cues. I will crouch down and open my arms up as a recall cue. This is actually a natural, attractive behavior for most dogs. So I'll crouch down, open my arms up. She comes towards me, I thumbs up as she's on her way, and then feed a treat when she gets close. Now, if you're up close or you want to teach a deaf dog to recall when they're looking away, you could use a tap. So my dog, I do a shoulder tap. So she knows that to turn and come with me wherever I'm going. And a vibration is also a good tool. So if we have gone through the process of conditioning the dog that the sensation of a vibration through a collar is a positive thing, and there are collars that are vibration only, these are the only ones I would use, and we want to keep in mind that a vibration on its own can actually be really uncomfortable or aversive to certain dogs. So we start really slow on the lowest possible vibration setting, and maybe even holding that vibration a little ways away from the dog, so they just barely feel it, and then we feed a treat, and slowly bringing up that sensation, always within a level where the dog is comfortable with it. So they are not trying to move away from it. They do not appear startled by it, but they can sense it. So vibration can be a good tool for a dog that's at a distance who might not see you in that moment. We would do a short vibration. The dog turns and looks. You can mark with the vibration collar, or you can do a thumbs and feed them when they get close. For some dogs, you could teach them actually like a light cue as well. So I know some people who have used flashlight cues to recall their deaf dogs in, where we just shine a little light. The dog has paired that with the experience of seeing us visually calling them. And so when they see the light, that's a cue to turn and come back towards us. When they come back towards us, you can use whatever marker you use, thumbs up, a visual cue of any sort, vibration, and then feed close to your body. That was a really good question. What other questions do you have about disabled dogs? One thing I'll note is that disabled dogs can get around this world in such an amazing way. Sometimes it's hard to tell that that dog does not have all the same abilities as the average dog. I remember when I was just starting out in training, there was a dog in a play group I was running, and he was in that play group for 6 months before we realized he was deaf. So he had been startling a little bit more as he was getting older. He appeared like he was not always super comfortable with the dogs right behind him. And then we discovered that it was because he didn't know they were behind him until they touched him. So he was having these startle responses because he had no auditory stimulus behind him telling him there's a dog right there. Some of these dogs are so amazing, you might not even notice they're blind. If they have a good sense of where things are in the world, those dogs can get around just as well as our dogs who are sighted. All right, we're gonna go on to the next slide. I wanna talk about no and stopping unwanted behavior. We get a lot of questions about using corrections, teaching the dog how to stop something, teaching the dog not to do something. Now, at Canine Turbo Training, we follow scientific-based, force-free dog training methods. So we typically do not use the word no, because no does not give the dog any information about what they should do. So with force-free training and with the science, we've learned that animals learn best when they are given information about what they should do. What should I do in this moment? So here I stole this photo off the internet. There's a link down at the bottom for where it came from. I love it. A cat and a dog high-fiving over the trash can that they've tipped over together. Digging through the trash is one that I've had to experience with my dog. Counter surfing, where they jump up and steal things off the counter, is another behavior. The word no doesn't tell the dog anything about what they're supposed to do when they experience a trash can or when there's food on the counter. So anytime I want to teach a dog to stop doing a behavior, because believe me, I didn't actually want my dog digging through my trash, I use 3 different steps. The first one is going to be management. So I want to manage the environment so that I'm setting the dog up for success and they are not practicing the unwanted behavior. Let's use this trash can example because that's what the picture is of. And my dog who knocks over my trash cans is right by my side here. So with a trash can, I'll do a few different things. One, I might put that trash can in a cupboard or in a closet. I want to make sure the trash cans all have lids on them. But my dog was actually very skilled at opening a lidded trash can. She's from the streets. She's very smart. She knows how to get trash out of a can. I've seen some people go as far as taking a dog crate, turning it up on its end and putting the trash can inside the crate, which I think is brilliant. And another option is having that trash can in a room that is gated off so your dog does not have access. Now, these are just some different steps. There are some trash cans that are more difficult to open. So if you have a dog who tends to knock the lid off your trash can, you can look into trash cans with locking mechanisms on them. But putting that trash can away in a cupboard and even baby-proofing that cupboard is a really good step. So all my trash cans are in cupboards at this point in our life. Although I do have one in my bedroom that's elevated, so it's up on top of a shelf. Now, the management sets them up so they're not practicing, but the dog was getting into the trash for a reason. Every single behavior our animals use have some function for that individual. So my dog was digging through the trash because she was used to hunting for food. So it was very natural and normal for her to search for food, and just getting a bowl of food on the ground did not meet all her needs. She wasn't starving anymore. She had a steady supply of food, but searching for food is a very strong, powerful behavior. So this is part of the brain called the seeking mechanism. Seeking is the same thing that's activated when we go shopping or switch through Netflix looking for the show we want to watch, but never actually ending up on anything. Because searching itself can be really, really reinforcing. So my dog was digging through trash, not because she needed food, but because she enjoyed searching. She needed to search for food. So if I've taken away her access to a trash can, how can I give her an outlet for digging through trash without digging through trash? One way to provide an outlet for this particular behavior is to practice food hunts. So you can hide food around a room, then bring your dog into the room and say, find it. Or with my deaf dog, it was pointing. So her find it is a cue that's pointing at a general area. And then I help the dog find the hidden food around the room. Now, another behavior that she was practicing when digging through the trash was shredding, which is part of the dog's predatory sequence. So if a dog were to go out and hunt and catch prey, one of the things they need to do is dissect that prey by shredding it. Going through the trash feels a lot like shredding to the dog. So I also gave my dog cardboard boxes with dog food in it that she could shred up in order to get to that dog food. Now, anytime I give these to dogs, I always want to observe them to make sure they're not eating the cardboard. I give them treats for spitting the cardboard out, because when there's food in there, our dogs typically will spit out the pieces of cardboard as they're going back in for more food. And then when the dog's all done, I'll direct them over to some treats off to the side and I'll pick up all that cardboard. So those were outlets for the natural behaviors that my dog was practicing when she was digging through the trash. And then the last thing is teaching an alternate behavior. So the training piece of this actually is the third step I take. And if I have actually put away all my trash cans and provided my dog an outlet, it's not a necessary step. So for this particular behavior, I don't actually have to teach my dog not to dig through trash cans because all the trash cans are up and away. But if I know that she's going to be going into different environments where the trash might be on the ground, say if we went over to a friend's house and they had just a trash can sitting on the ground, I might want her to know how to leave that alone. So here's where I want to really teach her what behavior I want her to do. So I might teach her, here's a trash can. When you see a trash can, any calm behavior you offer will be reinforced. So laying down in the room, sitting down in the room, coming over and engaging with me, I'll give treats for any of those behaviors. And since I'm going to use a lot of treats here, I use her dog food typically. So I'll just take a portion of her dog food from her breakfast or her dinner, and I use that to reward the behaviors I like. Now, if she goes over towards that trash can, I'll just encourage her back away from it using a positive interrupter. So this is usually a sound, but it can be any stimulus that tells the dog to stop what they're doing and come over to me. My favorite is a kissy noise, so I'll go, and when the dog turns and looks at me, hey, what was that noise? I say, yes, and I feed them a treat. It's very similar to a recall behavior. Now I'll use that noise if the dog is going towards the trash. Now, one way to make sure that they don't practice knocking the trash over as I start introducing it to them again is to have your dog on leash. So if they're going over thinking, oh, I'm going to get into that trash, they're stopped by the leash. I'm not going to pull back on the leash. I will just hold the leash steady so that they can't get to the trash can. And when they choose to move away from again, I'll say yes or click or in some way mark that behavior and then give them a reinforcer, such as a treat or play or praise and petting. I want them to learn that moving away from the trash, any sort of calm behaviors when there's a trash can around, those all pay off. One of my favorite ways to do this is to have an empty trash can when I start out, so there's not really anything interesting in there, and then treat dispensing toys that the dog can play with. So they have options. They can go for the empty trash can, which doesn't hold any reinforcers, or they can go for the treat dispensing toys, which are super fun. So we're teaching them here, giving them a reinforcement history of playing with the toys instead of going for the trash. What questions do you have on stopping unwanted behavior without the use of corrections? Feel free to jump in with questions on that anytime. I'm going to go to the next slide though. Fear and aggression. So this is another one that we get a lot of questions on. Training your dog not to bite people who come into your home or bark at people who come into your home. Training your dog not to growl or snap at you when we reach towards them while they're eating. These behaviors first need to be managed. So with aggression, I always want to be working with a professional. So looking for a certified trainer to help me with that behavior because aggression can get us into sticky situations. And I want to set them up for success by managing the environment so they're not practicing. But we can train a dog to become less fearful or less aggressive. So by using classical counter conditioning and systematic desensitization, we can change a dog's emotional response to something that they currently find negative. So aggression typically comes out of a place of fear or anger or frustration. And we know fear is a negative feeling. It feels bad to be scared. So here, whenever we have a dog who's fearful or showing aggression, when we train, we're looking to change how they feel about whatever it is they're showing fear or aggression towards. And we do this by pairing that experience or trigger, that we like to call it, whatever it is that's eliciting the fear or aggression, with something the dog really, really likes at a distance where the dog feels comfortable. So systematic desensitization means we're going to break it down step by step, starting in a place where the dog is not showing fear or aggression, and slowly introducing them to that trigger either closer or a little more intensely. For example, let's take a dog who's afraid of noises. So maybe you have a dog who becomes really scared whenever they hear the beep of your microwave. It might sound silly, but I know probably 15 dogs at least who are afraid of a beep. Now, if you have a dog who's afraid of a beep, I might record that sound on my phone or on some sort of video or audio recorder. And what I want to do is I want to turn the volume all the way down, so you can just hardly hear that sound. And I might put that phone a little ways away from the dog, not right up next to them, and play the sound of that beep. As soon as the dog registers, hey, I think I heard that beep, I'll feed them a treat. And I'll do that 3 or 4 more times on that same volume level, so that they start to really recognize, oh, every time that little tiny hint of a beep occurs, something really good happens. Until the dog is starting to look to us for food when they hear that really quiet beep. Then I want to start to systematically increase that sound. So I'll go up just 1 click on the volume. And you may even do this on your computer instead of your phone, depending on how sensitive the dog is, because the computer tends to have a wider range of volume, so we can go up small, little, tiny incremental steps. But I'll go up just a little bit louder, and I'll play that same sound and feed the dog a treat. Slowly increasing the volume until we have it at a loud level where we can actually play the beep on the actual microwave. So that is one little example of counter-conditioning and systematic desensitization for sounds fear of a particular sound, in this case, that beep. Now, when we're working with a dog who is fearful or aggressive, we're using our management and we're using counter-conditioning and systematic desensitization, but we are going to be limited by who that dog is as an individual. So even though we have these amazing tool sets for helping dogs overcome their fears, become more comfortable so they don't feel the need to use aggression, our dog, our individual dog, is only going to be as comfortable and happy with those things as they, as an individual, can be. So I think of this usually in the realm of reactivity or aggression towards people or dogs. So let's say we have a dog who barks and growls when they see other dogs. Now, we can work with that dog to help them get way more comfortable seeing other dogs, but that individual might not be the kind of dog who actually wants to go over and meet all the strange dogs that they see. Just like you might not be a person who wants to go over and meet every stranger you come across. Our dogs are going to be as social as they are as an individual. So we can work with them to get them as comfortable as they can be. But if you have a dog who's a little bit more of what we might call an introvert in the human world, where they have some dog friends that they like, but they don't want to go over and say hello to everyone they meet, training will not change who they are. So if your dog gets comfortable with 1 or 2 other friends, but you find that when you introduce them to other dogs, they just don't want it, it is going to be very hard to get them to like meeting strange dogs because they just are not an individual who enjoys that. We think of it as a spectrum for all of our dogs. If you start with a dog who was under-socialized when they were young, maybe they're one of those puppies who was sick during that sensitive period of socialization when their brains were more sticky, as I called it. So they missed out on meeting other dogs during that time in their life. They might show a lot of fear towards other dogs. And we might be able to work with them using our management so that they're not seeing other dogs outside of training, training them so every time they see a dog, really great things happen. So they start to see other dogs and anticipate tasty chicken, their favorite toys, so much praise and attention from mom and dad. So when they start seeing other dogs, they're actually getting really happy and excited. And we could teach them some emergency behaviors, how to turn away from other dogs, how to engage with us while another dog's around, how to do a U-turn or run behind a car or turn their attention to treats on the ground. And they might start to really love other dogs and actually want to go see other dogs. So if you have a dog who's in their core, in their genetics, very social, but they missed out on young socialization, with training, we can help them become more social. But we might have the same kind of dog who missed out on that sensitive period of socialization when they were young, and we're working with them and training them, and they become more comfortable seeing other dogs, and they start to make a few friends, but they don't want to meet every dog. That is okay. That individual might not be one who wants to go up and see all the strangers. And now with a similar case, if we have a dog who's uncomfortable with other dogs, they were socialized a ton when they were young. So they went out to maybe puppy classes and they met other dogs in controlled settings and they had play and they went on walks with other dogs. And now they tend to show fear or aggression when they're introduced to new dogs. In that scenario, we set all this stuff up for success in the beginning. And our dog is saying, I don't like meeting new dogs. For that dog, we're likely going to have a lot more management into their adult life. So they are telling us, I am just not a fan of meeting other dogs. For that individual, I'd likely teach them how to see other dogs. So we can go out on walks and we can see other dogs. That's a-okay. I'd have multiple pieces of management in place to make sure that another dog's not coming over to us or we're not accidentally running over too close to them. But I would not make that dog go over and meet other dogs. I want them to be as comfortable as they can be. And teaching a dog to love every stranger is not likely going to happen if they're not a huge fan of it. Let me know if you have any questions on that kind of genetic basis for how far training can go with fear and aggression. Now, other things we can do, as I mentioned, is teaching those emergency behaviors. And lastly, I did want to mention muzzle training, because with any individual who's showing aggression, or any individual at all really, muzzle training can be a really important step. I like every dog to be comfortable wearing a muzzle, because you might run into a situation, even with your super, super social dog, where they might be in pain. Let's say they broke a leg or their tail got shut in a door. They're in a lot of pain. Aggression is actually a really healthy, natural behavior when you are afraid or hurt. So even our most social dog, if they're in pain and we have to take them to emergency vet who they've never met, aggression is very possible. So I like every dog to learn how to be comfortable wearing a muzzle. Just real quick, this is a Baskerville Ultra muzzle. This is our favorite, tends to be the most comfortable. Your dog can pant, they can eat, they can drink water with it. But that is something that we can always teach a dog who might be having more aggression than the average dog, or a dog just to prepare them for the future. So there's a lot we can do with training to help our dogs who have fear or aggression, but we need to have realistic expectations for who our individual is with how far that can go. And I do want to just show you this photo here of Hero. I love this dog. He is out exploring the world. He's got his muzzle on. He's got a little jacket on, a vest that says, I'm anxious, I need space. So that he can go out and explore the world without the risk of aggression towards people. So he's uncomfortable with hands reaching towards him. He's shown aggression in the past, and now he's out living his best life thanks to his owners who have done such amazing work getting him comfortable. Feel free to ask any questions on fear or aggression. And how we can train it and the limitations of training. On a slightly different subject though, I want to talk about some of the things our dogs can learn. So our dogs' brains are amazing. Our dogs can learn so much more than we ever thought maybe 10, 15 years ago. And the more we study our dogs and the more we work with our dogs, we found that they can learn all sorts of different concepts. So concept is a broad idea. Whereas you might be used to more basic behaviors. Teach the dog to sit, teach the dog to stay, teach the dog to lay down, our basic manners. Here we have a bunch of different concepts our dogs can actually learn. And lots of different animals can learn. So one of them I'll point out is matching. Matching is where we take a picture or a symbol of an item, and then the dog has to find that item in the real world. Or you can have two symbols, and the dog has to pick the one that matches this other one. There have been videos of fish learning how to match through positive training, which I think is really amazing. Consent is a big concept that we are introducing to our dogs more and more. So consent is the idea that you can say yes or no to something happening to you. So we like to use consent for petting and for veterinary behaviors and husbandry behaviors. With my dog, she has a, okay, let's do it behavior for things like brushing or nail trims. So I bring out her brush and I show it to her. And if she touches it with her nose, I go get my treat pouch and we sit down to do a brushing session. So she has to touch it with her nose. That's a cue to me to, we're gonna train. I grab my treat pouch. She then chooses to lay down on her bed and touch the brush one more time. She touches the brush one more time. I stroke her with the brush. And then I say yes, and I feed her a treat. She can say no at any point by turning her head away from me or getting up and leaving. Now, she has multiple ways to say no, because just getting up and leaving the bed takes a lot of effort. Now, she has some pain in her back legs, like I mentioned, so she might not be willing to use all that energy to get up just because she's uncomfortable with the brushing. So I'm also watching her for turning her head. If she turns her head, I stop brushing and bring my hands back into my lap. Then she'd have to nose target the brush to get me to start again. But the treats happen for experiencing the brushing. Now, she started to really like the brushing at this point, but in the beginning, it was something pretty foreign to her. I don't know if she had really experienced a lot of brushing before. Same thing with nail trims. She has a behavior where she puts her paw in my hand and leaves her paw there. As long as her paw is there, I can trim her nails. I work one nail at a time, really small, tiny trims, because she's got dark nails that are really hard not to hit the quick with. And she gets a treat for every single clip I did. We used our systematic desensitization when we first started this, but she knows that if she pulls her paw back, I will stop everything and put everything back into my lap, only going forward when she re-engages her paw in my hand. Oh, we have a question here. So a dog who's picky with his friends seems to test potential new friends by starting play and then quickly stopping a couple of times. If the other dog reads his signals, then they pass the test and they get to play. If they don't read his signals, he shuts down and becomes submissive, which can turn into more assertive behavior like growling or snapping when these dogs don't stop. Is it best that we leave the park? Don't like him being overwhelmed. Oh, this is such a good question, Christine. Yeah, if there are dogs who are not listening to his cues at the dog park and he's starting to feel uncomfortable, I would leave during that time. So the moment we start to see that those dogs aren't listening and he starts to shut down a little bit, I'd get out then if possible so we don't reach that point of growling and snapping. I actually wrote an article it was maybe almost a year ago now, or a few months ago at least, on teaching puppies how to read cutoff signals, because reading the cutoff signals is not something that puppies naturally do. So a lot of our younger dogs are not going to notice this head turn. And for anybody who's new to the term cutoff signals are any sign from an animal that they would like an interaction to slow down or end. So turning the head away, stress signals such as flicking the tongue or yawning. Oh, sorry, I always have to do all of them, especially yawning. Once I say the word yawning, I have to yawn. Or you might see things like laying down, so lowering their body position to start to calm things down. We'll see displacement behaviors such as sniffing where there's not actually really anything to sniff, or stopping to drink water. Those kinds of signals are a request for an interaction to pause. And when other dogs don't listen to them, they can get overwhelmed. So I like to use the analogy of dancing, where if somebody came up and asked you to dance and you said no thank you, and they just keep asking you and following you around and continuing to ask you, eventually you might reach the point of aggression. So you might scream or you might hit them because you already said no. Now that person might not understand that they were coming on too strong. So that's sort of what it's like on the other end for our dogs who have no idea that they're coming on way too strong. But for your dog, if you see those other dogs are not listening to his signals, that's time for us to head out. Dog parks can be kind of tricky because not all of them have temperament tests. In fact, very few do. And we don't always have dogs who are being watched closely by their owners there or who have had training to actually understand what the other dogs are saying. When I'm looking at dog parks, I always want to be really cautious. So if I show up and I see there's a dog there who's showing aggression towards the other dogs or not listening to the cutoff signals of the other dogs, I skip the dog park that day and we go on a walk instead. The dog park, I think of like a big party. So again, we have some dogs who just are never really going to enjoy the dog park. They might be more of the introvert type than the extroverts, if you're thinking of it in human terms. Okay, yeah, your dog hasn't tolerated most pups since he got bit. A bit older, excuse me. Oh, good, not a bite. He got a bit older. Yeah, a lot of our adults are not huge fans of playing with the puppies. I think of it sort of like putting your teenage child in with kindergartners. They might tolerate it, but it's not usually their favorite time. So yes, I love how you're thinking here about the dog park and about your dog, where you're really seeing him, he wants to play, he likes other dogs, but he's not a fan of those dogs who are not listening to him, which I completely understand. So good looking out for him. If anybody goes to the dog park, but they're looking to try and have it be a little less overwhelming for their dog, I tend to go without the dog and look for times that are calmer, so fewer dogs, or times where people frequent them that pay attention to their dogs and are working with their dogs. It can be different from day to day or from dog to dog with who's there. But again, if I see a dog who's not listening to the other dogs or we're seeing any sort of aggression from the other dog, I like to keep my dog out of that situation. All right, so let's go back to concepts. So we've kind of talked about the concept of consent. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Consent is pretty new to the dog training world, although it's been used in exotic animals in zoos for a long time. Because when you have a couple of ton elephant or rhino and you need them to get their nails ground down, and not nails, I think they have hooves. The elephants might have nails. I need to learn a little bit more about my big exotic animals. They need to be able to participate in that. They need to be willing to do that because we cannot overpower an animal like that. So same thing with dogs now. The more we work towards force-free methods, getting the dog to be a cooperative partner, the more we found we can apply these same kind of concepts to dogs. And there's a lot of really fun things we can teach our dog with concepts. So I have a video here of this sweet Sheltie learning her colors.
Yes, good blue. Yellow. Yes, good yellow.
That's it, girl.
Blue. Yes.
Good girl. She's so great. She was brilliant at this. So dogs are not colorblind. They are typically red-green colorblind. So they can see, it's going one more time. They can see blue and yellow pretty well. But like a lot of humans, red and green, not so well. Those colors seem to look very similar to them. Just a second, let's get us back up. There we go. So they are diconic instead of triconic in their eyes, which sets them up to see fewer colors than us, although still seeing the difference between colors, not just black and white like we used to think. So because they can see colors, we can actually teach them colors. Now, this one doesn't always have a need. You don't need to teach your dog colors, but it's a really cool way to expand their mind. Teach them something different from what we usually do. And it is a form of mental enrichment. So by learning this new concept, you can have them pick out a blue item in a lineup of other items. You could have them pick out what's yellow in the room. And that can be a really fun game to play on cold, snowy days like we've been having this week, when maybe it's a little bit too chilly for our dogs to go out and walk. Now, mimicry is another really fun one. Mimicry is the idea that a dog can perform the same behavior you perform, even if you've never taught them that particular behavior. So to teach this, all you really need are 3 known behaviors. 3 or 4, sometimes more, depends on how quickly your dog picks up on concepts. And what we do is we have the dog watch us, and then we perform that behavior, and then we cue the dog to do it. So your dog needs to be able to watch you. You might say, sit, and then, or excuse me, you might say, watch me, and then sit down yourself. And when your dog sees that, you could say, do it, and then cue a sit behavior. So they are getting cued to do what you have done. Then we need to perform this a few times. So our dog starts to pick up on when you sit, they should then sit. And then we practice with other behaviors. So you can have your dog watch you. You can lay down on the ground, say, do it, and then cue them to lay down on the ground. This is where the concept starts to form. When we have multiple behaviors that we perform and then have them do it. Once your dog no longer needs your sit cue or your down cue, once you've done the behavior and asked them to do it, we can start practicing with more novel type behaviors. So stepping up on something and then having them do it. The first time they do something that you've never taught them before, they've just observed you doing, is really amazing. And that's when we start to see that concept kind of becoming clear to our dog. So they get treats for doing that. I throw a little party, hey, you get it. We had a trainer who actually worked with a dog on how to paint using mimicry. So you can teach your dog really amazing things with mimicry. They can do so much more than we ever thought they could through this concept of social learning. Now, mimicry is only possible because of what's called mirror neurons in the brain. So mirror neurons are these motor neurons. They're automatic, so you don't have to think about what you're doing, but they allow you to, in a sense, experience what somebody else is experiencing physically. So we'll see 2 dogs who are playing where maybe one is running in kind of a rocking gait and the other kind of lines up perfectly and they're doing the same behavior. That's thanks to the mirror neurons in their brains. And the mirror neurons allow us to mimic what another animal is doing. So this is a really cool new concept in training, and it is really, really fun to train. And then finally, I put on here reading. Now, I'm not sure that you can actually teach a dog to read a novel or anything quite that intense, but dogs can learn to read symbols and match them to behaviors. So this is a kind of a more extensive form of mimicry or matching. But with reading, we have at least one dog working with us, with a client who has worked with us, who's taught their dog how to read the behaviors sit and down. That's Emmy. If you've ever looked on our Facebook page, you might see some photos or videos of Emmy. She's fantastic. And her owner, Emily, has taught her how to read certain words. So I believe she knows the word spin and the word sit. And so the way we do that is by writing the word in big letters so the dog can see it, showing them that word, then cueing the behavior. So if we pair the symbol S-I-T with the word sit repeatedly, what happens in the dog's brain is they want to jump ahead in order to earn the treat as fast as possible. So if those letters are constantly paired with that cue to sit, over time we get a dog who sees those letters and they skip ahead waiting for us to give that verbal cue and they sit down. And so they can actually learn how to read. And I actually have a book called Teach Your Dog to Read, which I think is really awesome and silly. So there are these really amazing concepts we can teach our dogs, super fun things that help just enrich their world. They can learn so much more than we ever thought, and learning helps keep them from being bored. So we think about what our dogs do in our daily lives. They spend a lot of their time waiting for us to get back from work, waiting for us so that they can play or run outside. These sort of games can just expand their day, give them something new to do. Any questions on concepts or teaching dogs concepts? Okay, so this is the last slide I have for us today. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about when we should and should not train something. So we've touched on this when we were talking about fear and aggression, and when we were talking about stopping unwanted behaviors. Here we have the Humane Hierarchy. So the Humane Hierarchy is actually something that trainers all follow. So if you're a certified dog trainer, you'd be very familiar with this Humane Hierarchy. This is steps we take when assessing a behavior and looking to modify it. So the very first step is paying attention to our animal's wellness, their medical needs, their physical and nutritional needs. So if I'm seeing a behavior and I'm seeing it for the first time in an adult dog, I usually want a veterinarian to check them out too, because we need to make sure that animal is physically sound before we think about training anything. Especially if we're seeing aggression or fear in an adult dog for the first time, that tells me there could be something physical going on here. Maybe there is pain. Our dogs are really good at hiding pain. Maybe they're not getting enough nutrients. So maybe your dog is, or they're not getting good nutritional balance. So for dogs who are doing things such as eating their poop, or even we're seeing now that sensitivity to certain things, fear and aggression can actually come out of a nutritional imbalance. Anxiety can increase due to nutritional imbalance. So we're really looking at making sure that animal is physically sound, talking to the vet about what they're eating, talking to the vet about their behaviors so that everybody's on the same page. We really strongly believe in working as a community and as a team. So having our trainers and our vets and us all in contact helps it so that the dog is getting more holistic care. Now, if we've ruled out anything physical, that dog is very well, they're getting good food, they have the right amount of physical activity, everything is going well. The next thing we look at is antecedent arrangements. So antecedent arrangements is a big way to say management. An antecedent is whatever comes first before the behavior. So a stimulus that the animal sees, and then they perform a behavior in response to it. So for example, with our digging through the trash example, an antecedent might be seeing the trash can. Now, an antecedent arrangement is simply changing how those antecedents fall. So setting it up so that you no longer see the trash can, or you see the trash can, but there's no access to it. Antecedent arrangement is all about setting up the environment so that your dog or your animal can be successful. Now, you'll notice that antecedent arrangement actually comes before positive reinforcement training. So we always want to set it up so our dog is no longer practicing an unwanted behavior, or we set it up so that our dog has lots of really positive outlets, different antecedents, so that different behaviors are occurring. That actually comes before we start teaching the dog a new behavior. And the reason for that is because this humane hierarchy is built off of what's called LIMA, least intrusive, minimally aversive. So as we're going through, we're thinking about what is the least intrusive for the dog. Teaching an animal a different behavior to do is actually pretty intrusive. We're telling the dog, you're going to do something completely different when you're faced with this. You could think about it like if you have a kid who's eating something that they shouldn't be eating, something really intrusive might be stopping them while they're mid-bite. Whereas something less intrusive would be having that food in a location where they couldn't reach it. So changing our antecedent arrangements before we go to training. Now, positive reinforcement training is our next step after antecedent arrangements. So we have set up the environment so the animal is not practicing unwanted behaviors, and they have lots of different outlets for natural healthy behaviors. Now we want to teach them what we want them to do. So a place where I would train is teaching a dog not to rush out a door. Now I could use an antecedent arrangement, putting a gate in that doorway so the dog's not practicing rushing out of it. But I still want them to learn not to push through when I open the gate. And the reason for that mainly is so they don't accidentally knock me over and they don't accidentally slip out the door without their collar on or their leash on. So here I might use positive reinforcement, reinforcing the dog for sitting or standing back when I start to slowly open the door. That would be a form of teaching where I'm adding in something the dog really likes. I am adding something which is positive to reinforce the behavior, having an increase in frequency. For example, giving the dog a treat. Now, typically, that's as far as we need to go in this humane hierarchy. Because with antecedent arrangements in place and positive reinforcement, there are very few things we can't teach an animal. Now, one thing we might still do is what's called differential reinforcement of alternate behaviors. So here, if we have a behavior that we cannot get the animal to stop for some reason, perhaps you have a dog who is showing compulsive behaviors and they are spinning. And we have gotten them to the vet and the vet is working with us to make sure that they are as physically sound as possible and that they have good nutrition. We've set up the environment so that they have lots of different outlets. We are rewarding behaviors we like, but we're finding the dog still occasionally does spin. Here's where we might use differential reinforcement of an alternate behavior. If the dog starts spinning, we might encourage them to do something else and reward that behavior. If we present them with a stimulus that typically triggers spinning, we might reinforce any other behavior. So here it is, we are not giving something good for the behavior that we don't want to see. We're only giving the good thing for other behaviors. For example, if I'm eating, I might use differential reinforcement of an alternate behavior with my dog. I have food. I'm going to give you dog treats out of my pocket for not trying to take my food. Any behavior aside from trying to take my food. Now, that is as far as we typically go. And you'll see the little arrows on the side have gotten way smaller. Extinction, negative reinforcement, and negative punishment is another form of training. Extinction being where we remove reinforcement from a behavior that was previously reinforced. So for example, if a dog used to jump up and somebody would pet him and say, "Hi, how are you?" And now we don't want the dog to jump up. Maybe they got bigger, so they were little, and now they've gotten bigger. Extinction would be no longer providing the reinforcement for that behavior. So we're ignoring that behavior. So the dog is still jumping. We haven't put our management in place, or our management has failed and the dog is still practicing jumping, but we are not giving them any sort of reinforcement for it. Extinction comes with frustration. So we tend to see what's called an extinction burst. The behavior becomes more intense before it goes away. So maybe they were jumping on us at a rate of 1 jump every 5 seconds, and now they're jumping 1 jump every second. It gets more intense, and then they stop jumping. So extinction is a way we can teach an animal, but it does require the animal to go through a period of frustration. Negative reinforcement means that we are taking away something in order to increase the frequency of a behavior, which means there needs to be something the dog doesn't enjoy that we can take away so that we can keep that behavior going. So this might be, if we're using negative reinforcement, we might have a dog who, for example, does not like us saying sit, 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 and when the dog sits, we stop saying it. That would be a form of negative reinforcement. Negative punishment would be removing something so that the behavior happens less frequently. So, for example, if we have a dog who jumps up, we could actively go out of the room. We disappear. We remove ourselves, remove the dog's attention. Negative punishment we avoid using as much as possible in very rare cases, such as with a dog who is playfully biting. I might use it, but I really want to focus on my antecedent arrangements, setting it up so that if there is a scenario where the dog tends to bite, I have something else present for the dog to do. And then positive punishment is where we add something that the dog doesn't like to reduce the frequency of a behavior. There is a lot of fallout that can come with positive punishment, including a dog becoming more fearful or less consistently aggressive, so aggressive in ways that we don't expect. And so positive punishment is not something that we recommend. There are ways, you can get away with positive punishment in certain scenarios and that nothing happens. The dog could learn perfectly fine that way, and we might not have fallout, but there's a risk. So because there is a risk, we avoid that one. And we have so many other tools we can use. So here we have a question. How do you stop dogs from barking at house guests? Oh, this is a really good question. So it does take several steps here. First, I want to identify how is the dog feeling when they're barking at the house guests? Because dogs will bark for several different reasons. Some dogs bark because they're excited. They're like, oh my gosh, there's somebody here, bark, 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 I'm super excited. Most dogs are feeling pretty intense when they're barking though. So we might have a dog who's so ramped up and excited, they're no longer feeling great. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited, I'm so excited, I'm so excited. It's an intensity level that we need to start bringing down. And a lot of dogs bark because they're actually kind of uncomfortable with the guests. So somebody has come into their house, they've come into their territory, it's an intense experience for the dog, and they're barking to say, hey, this is my house, I need you to get out. Most dogs I meet who bark at house guests are barking because they are concerned about the person entering into their territory or because they are concerned about people in general. So I'm going to identify what the dog's reason for barking is by looking at the rest of the body language as well. Is the dog loose and happy? Is their body kind of loose and floppy? What do their eyes look like? Are they big and round with their pupils dilated? Because that tells me the dog is either overexcited or anxious or fearful. How is their tail wagging? Is it loose and floppy? Is it not wagging at all? Is it tucked under? Or is it really high and moving really fast? A high tail moving really fast is what's called flagging, and it actually is a distance increasing signal. They want more space from that person. What we see in a happy dog is loose, floppy tail. So here I'm going to be looking at all these details about the dog's body language to assess why the dog is barking. Now, most barking at a house guest is going to occur because of an emotional response. I'm worked up. I'm overly excited. I'm nervous and fearful. So in this case, it is very hard to reinforce the barking because that is a symptom of an emotion. So for most of these dogs, what I want to do is set up a routine greeting for them, something that is more predictable. So I do this with my dog. I have a setup so that people will come in and sit down before she actually goes greets them. Now, with most dogs, we set this up so that the dogs are actually in a separate room, not even seeing the person first come in, because seeing the person enter through the door tends to be the most intense experience for our dogs. They're seeing somebody come in through that weak spot in the territory, or through that little narrow hallway where everything is so exciting, where our people leave and our people come back. The door is just an emotionally charged space. So for most dogs, I have them in a completely separate room working on enrichment like a Kong with some music playing, and I have my guest come in and sit down. Then I go get the dog, and I have them come out on leash. So they're not going to rush all the way up to the person going bark, 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 where the person might get nervous, and the dog might get more closer than they're comfortable. And what I want to do is I want to set it up so that when they see the person, I'm changing the emotional response. So they see the person, I'm actually going to feed them. So your dog might see the person and start barking, but I'm going to present food, whether they're barking or not, which always feels really weird. It feels very strange when you first start feeding a dog who's barking, because we learn so often not to reinforce the behaviors we don't want to see. In this case, though, if the barking is from a place of emotional response, it is very hard to reinforce it. And if you do reinforce it, the behavior changes. So it tends not to be as intense and it stops a lot faster. So for example, with my dog, her greeting protocol, she's actually behind a gate. She can see the person come in because she's deaf. And I don't have any other way to say, hey, there's going to be somebody in the house. I can't say, let's go greet our guest, because she's deaf. So she's behind a gate where she can see them come in. I shout over to my guest, come on in. And they know the routine before they come in. They come in, my dog sees them, and she gets a treat right away. So I'm starting to pair the sight of a guest coming in with good things, or the sight of the guest in the living room with good things. I wait until that dog is calm. So for my dog, I wait until she can look at the person, look back at me and take food, and she's smiling and happy and can perform a behavior such as sit or touching my hand. Once she's relaxed and happy, then she can go greet. Now, if this dog has a history of aggression, I'm going to have a certified professional come and help me with that, or work with me on a specific plan for that dog. In fact, my dog does have a history of aggression, and even though I'm a certified trainer and behavior consultant, I had another trainer come in and work with me, because when it is your dog, it is much more difficult to be objective. So it's always good to have a professional work with us if there's any history of aggression. For a dog who's excitably barking, slowing things down, getting a calm behavior first, then going and greeting will reinforce being calm when you see the person. Now, I did mention that my dog does bark when she sees people, and that you can reinforce barking. I did accidentally reinforce barking with my dog, but like I said, that barking changed. So she started out with whoa, 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 an intense alert bark, and I knew that was coming from a place of emotional distress. So when the people came in, I started feeding right away, even though she was barking. And now what she does is she sees a person come in and she goes, wah, 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 and then she looks at me, which I adore, because I don't mind my dog saying, hey, somebody's here, but she's no longer upset. She is feeling calm and happy, and then she can go greet when she is relaxed. I hope that helps, Amanda. There's a lot of little details with the barking at house guests, so let me know if you have any extra questions about that. So here we have a question from Christine. Do you, Canine Turbo, feel euthanasia due to aggressive behavior is ever justifiable? Are dogs ever so untrainable that this is the best option? Wow, this is a really good question, Christine. And this is something that we do discuss as a company. So with euthanasia, there is a lot that goes into that decision. This is not something that anyone ever comes to lightly. And we typically do not make the recommendation ourselves. But if somebody has come to that decision with their vet and a veterinary behaviorist, or if somebody has tried all management options and training options, and the dog's welfare has to significantly decrease because of the management, we do think that there can be scenarios where euthanasia is justifiable. So if we have found that in order to keep both the dog and the public safe, the dog's welfare is going to be greatly reduced, they no longer have a quality of life, those are the scenarios where euthanasia can be an ethical option, humane euthanasia through the veterinarian. It is rare, but it is something that we do occasionally come across, working with dogs who have a long history of aggression or with very serious aggression. So thank you for this question. It is a really tough one. What we really think about is the welfare of everyone involved. If we have a dog who is mutilating people, killing dogs, or killing children, if they get loose, that can be a very big safety concern. If we have a dog with really severe anxiety as well as aggression, that increases the intensity of that dog's lack of welfare. So never taking it lightly, we will occasionally come across a situation where we do believe that it is the humane option. It's a really tough situation to be in when you have a dog that you love that needs that as a way to keep them safe. You know, we think a short, tough life is really hard, and we don't want that for any of our dogs. But really good question, Christine. Any other questions? This was our last slide, so any questions you have? Just so you know, we will have more of the Ask the Trainer events coming up. I'm not sure what the next one is, but we're going to have one on making vet visits happy and manageable. We're going to have one on exercises for our high energy dogs, what we can do to get their energy out. We're going to have all sorts of fun Ask the Trainer webinars coming up because I really like doing these. I'm here to answer any of your questions. I think we are, yeah, we're just at 8 o'clock. But I'm going to send out an email afterwards with just some those alternate exercises to walks for our dogs who are not super interested in walking. Any other resources I find that I think you might be interested in. You can also check out our website. We have a lot of free resources on there, and our YouTube channel has all of our past webinars recorded. So if you want to go through this one again, or if you want to see any of our others, we've done Ask the Trainer on puppies, on play, on we just recently did separation anxiety. Anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing you all in future webinars, and if you ever have questions, feel free to reach out. We're here to help. Thanks for joining us.